Hello and welcome to Meeting of the Minds, the interview discussion show that explores hot button topics in the theism-atheism landscape in a civil and respectful way. I'm your host, Christopher Maute, and I'm thrilled to have as my guest this afternoon Mr. Steve Shives, a YouTube phenomenon, atheist, entertainer, baseball cap wearing chunk of awesome. How you doing, Steve?
A lot better now. That was quite an introduction. Thank you.
I crafted
I'm
that
very
this
well.
morning
I'm very well.
after a couple too many cups of coffee. So
I've been there.
I hope you dig it.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I'd like to get started with a couple introductory questions, just to, in case you're not familiar with the format. I like to bookend the show with like 10 minutes of introductory and closing questions, and then the middle 30 to 25 minutes, I like to have a good back and forth discussion about things and stuff, both. And so let's start with some introductory questions. I'd like you to explain to the viewing audience and to myself how you would identify yourself and describe your worldview.
I identify as an atheist. I believe that it is almost certain, although I can't claim complete certainty, almost certain that there is no God.
Okay. And what about your worldview? Are there any more details about your worldview that you'd like to describe aside from that somewhat negative claim, something you don't believe in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could call me a naturalist. You'd call me a materialist. I reject the supernatural. I believe that everything that exists can ultimately be boiled down in principle to matter or to something that physically exists. I don't believe in the spirit or anything like that. Yeah.
All right, and some specific questions that I like to ask the atheists that come onto the show. Do you think that Jesus existed?
I think Jesus probably did exist. The analogy I like to draw is to a quasi-historical figure like someone like King Arthur or Robin Hood, someone around whom a lot of fanciful legend has been built up, but at the core of that, there is probably some kernel of historical truth, however unrecognizable compared to all the legend and the stories. I think that's probably the case with Jesus. I've heard and read some of the cases against a historical Jesus, and I find them compelling. And I think there is a really interesting case to be made that Jesus was just completely fabricated, or that he was a composite figure of different sort of itinerant preachers who were sort of wandering the Galilean region at that time. But I'm willing to believe that there was some historical basis, that there was a historical figure who was the inspiration for the Jesus stories.
All right. And another question that I have for you as an atheist, do you believe in anything supernatural?
I don't, but I have to, I always feel like I have to add to that when I say I don't, that belief is provisional. As is every belief I have, for the most part. Every belief I have about the outside world, every belief that is based on my senses and my experience, which is almost everything. Everything's provisional. I'm willing to admit that I could be wrong, but I need to be shown that I am wrong. At the moment, I don't believe in the supernatural at all, but that's because I've never seen any evidence that there is such a thing. If I were introduced to compelling evidence, then yeah, I would accept it. But at the moment, I don't. So I call myself a provisional naturalist.
Okay. I just need to interrupt for a second. I'm having you're kind of coming in and out as far as your fidelity. I'm just curious to know, am I also coming in and out, or are you hearing me clearly?
No, I can hear you. Are you having
good.
trouble hearing me?
Just every once in a while, it kind of phases in and out, and I don't know whether that's something just between you and I. Hopefully, it's not in the broadcast, but I'm getting the main picture of what you're saying. If there comes a point where I ask you to repeat yourself, please don't think that I'm hard of hearing. It may be a complete function of the fact that the fidelity is just a little funky. My wife is telling me that she can hear everything just fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to repeat myself. I won't take it personally.
Okay. Can't hear you, youngsters. And then my third question would be, and this might be a loaded question considering the series that you do, especially with the Josh McDowell book. So what is your opinion of the Bible?
You know, if I'm allowed to take the Bible as I want to take it, as a piece of literature, as a piece of mythology, then I actually have a relatively high opinion of the Bible. My dislike of the Bible and my need to criticize it and sort of go against it comes purely from the insistence among some Christians that it is the literal word of God, and that every single word of it is true and it is free from contradiction, and all these preposterous, blatantly false claims that some Christians say about it. If you can take it as a work of literature, and I'm talking specifically about the King James translation. I mean, I don't speak ancient Hebrew. I don't speak Koine Greek. I can't read the original languages. I'm not a scholar of it by any means. But the language of the King James translation, speaking as a literature student and as an English major in college, is just beautiful in parts. I mean, there are whole long sections of it that we can feel free to completely disregard, but the good stuff in it is really good. It's so beautifully written, and there are some really wonderful myths there, some really powerful stories. But if you insist that it's all true and that we should take this for moral guidance and as an authentic history, and I mean that completely ruins it. If you can come to it as a work of literature, then I think there's a lot to be said for it.
Great, I think that's really well said. And then a couple last questions for you are: what led you to your current beliefs?
I know some people don't like it when atheists say that their atheism was compelled by science, but in my case, that certainly was part of it. I was always interested in science from a young age, especially astronomy. And then when I got into high school and then post-high school, I developed an interest in biology and learned about evolution. And it was just sort of realizing that God is not a necessary belief. And then coming to terms with the fact that I never really believed. I tried to believe for many years. I told myself and told other people that I was a Christian, and then after I left Christianity behind, I still told people that I believed in God and these things. And I've had to sort of admit to myself and then admit to everybody else that I just didn't believe it. That there's no reason to think that is actually true. Belief isn't really something that you can choose. I mean, we talk a lot about, what people believe as though it's an act of will, and a lot of it is just, it's what you've been convinced of. You don't have a lot of conscious control over it. And I just got to a point where I had to admit that I didn't believe there was any such thing as God, that when I prayed, that I was talking to myself. There was nobody on the other end of that conversation.
Okay. Well, that pretty much answers my next question, which is, were you ever a theist? Because your story pretty much implies inherently that you came out of a theist framework into an atheist one. So you deconverted in a sense.
Yeah, my family, my immediate family was never super religious, but I was raised pretty much Christian. I was raised nominally Christian. There were more fundamentalist elements further up in my family, but my parents weren't super duper religious. But yeah, I called myself a Christian up through high school, and then at a certain point, I decided that just didn't work. I just didn't believe that anymore, but I still wanted to believe that there was something. So I started calling myself a deist because I had read Thomas Paine, I had read Voltaire, and their work had a great influence on me and still does to this day, and they identified as deists. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. And then eventually I had to, I realized I just didn't believe it, that there was just no cause to believe that it was true. But it was it was almost like having to quit smoking and going from the big nicotine patch to the little one. You have to step down. So I went from Christianity to deism, and then eventually to full out atheism.
Okay. So I think that gives everybody who's watching, as well as myself, a little bit more nuance into where you're coming from, so that when we get into the discussion, they have a little bit more of a framework of placing what you say. So let's get into the discussion. What I want to tell the people that are watching is how exactly you and I even came to correspond with each other. And what I wanted to say was there was a time pretty recently where I became somewhat obsessed with the presuppositional apologetic as popularized by Cy ten Bruggencate and Eric Hovind, and of course there's a whole bunch of people that fall under that umbrella term of presuppositionalist anymore, right? And it's not necessarily something that I'm very good at, which is philosophy. I'm more comfortable in the science of the cognitive sciences and sensation and perception and in psychology and things like that. So I was looking for people to bounce ideas off of, and it just so happened that I saw Steve Shives do a debate with Cy ten Bruggencate, and the way that you handled Cy's questions was so concise. You didn't try to engage him in his version of the presuppositional apologetic. It was more like you got from him the information that you wanted, and then you pretty much I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted. Something really loud just happened upstairs, and I'm having a hard time concentrating.
That's okay.
Okay. I think an ad came on the upstairs TV. My wife is watching this, so I'm sorry. Anyway, so you were able to deflect it. You were able to get from him the information you wanted, and then you were just like, okay, thank you, at the end of the conversation. But there was a point, and it was at the 36-minute and 40-second point of that show. It was the Bible-thumping wingnut show. And you challenge how he knows what a vicious cycle is. And man, if I could freeze frame it, it's like that Simpsons episode where, like, I think Bart freeze frames the kid getting his heart broken. He's like, I think that if you can see exactly the moment where he gets his heart broken. I think that if you rewatch that video, you can see something in Cy's eye, like a look of terror, like, I think I just fell into a trap. But instead of like pursuing that trajectory, you kind of went somewhere else, or he was deft enough to change the subject or something like that. So I was like so impressed that I emailed you with like my idea of how a breakdown of what a presup argument would go. And you were so kind in your response. And then through that, we kind of got into this Google Plus hangout with a YouTuber, a theist, by the name of Matthew 419. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you a couple questions about that and talk about it in general. I wanted to ask, first of all, for you to talk about what inspired you to make a video response to Matthew 419, and if you could put in your words what Matthew 419's challenge was.
Well, Matthew 419 posted a video basically asking what the appeal of atheism is, why he as a Christian should become an atheist. And he sent me a PM with the video. I probably never would have seen it, but and I don't know, there's something about me or about just my interest in the atheism versus theism conversation. I just never get tired of it, or at least I haven't up to this point, and I don't feel like the gas is running out. Like, it's just something that always interests me, and I'm always ready to talk about. And Matthew's question demonstrated a really common misunderstanding, I thought, of what atheism means, that I hear a lot from theists, particularly from evangelical Christians. The idea that theism somehow, or that atheism is like a team that you join, like we're recruiting, like, come on, be an atheist. It's so much fun. And that's not how it works. I mean, it is. I'm very happy being an atheist. I'm glad I'm an atheist. I'm there. I can talk about all the great things that are about an atheistic worldview and blah, blah, blah. But that's not really why. I mean, you become an atheist because you have a sincere belief or lack of belief, depending on how you choose to state it. But you you're convinced of something, or you recognize that you're not convinced of something. It's not like you just decide, I'm sick of being a theist. This sucks. I'm going to see what's going on over there. That's not the way it works. And I felt like that's sort of how
like checking
he
out the
was.
benefits packages between jobs or something.
Yeah, but at the same time, I also felt like he was making a good faith effort. That he was asking the wrong question, and he was asking it from a place that suggested he was kind of ignorant as to what atheism was. But at the same time, he seemed like he was really wanting to start a conversation, and that's what I like. I like to have conversations with people. So I made my response, and that's how I got invited to the Google Hangout that you attended, and several other of our fellow atheists were there, and it was a good time. I'm glad that we did that. I wish we would do things like that a little bit more often, with like a mixture of theists and atheists willing to not have like formal debates, but just to have a conversation like we're having right now.
Exactly, and I appreciate the fact that you like to have discussions, because I feel the same way, and that totally resonates with me. And I don't think that there's enough of it. And when I say not enough of it, I don't think that there's not enough of atheists and theists interacting, but I don't see them as engaging in a discussion where they each get to make their point and they each get to be heard.
Right.
So I think that it's a combination of the ADHD instant gratification environment that maybe the YouTubers have set up, like yourself.
Yeah, I take part of the blame.
Nonetheless, I wanted to talk about the Hangout a little bit, because it did seem that Matthew 4:19. And for those of you that are interested in this, you can look up Matthew 4:19. It's Matthew, Matthew, the number 4, and then the word 19. You can check out his channel, and it has the YouTube, Google Plus, on air live stream Hangout. Man, that's a mouthful. And you can see exactly what Steve and I are talking about. And he does put in a good faith effort to dial it down, because if you see some of his videos, he's a little polemic in the way that he talks about atheism and atheists and stuff like that. And towards the end, he decided, well, he didn't decide anything. He gave everybody an opportunity to have a closing argument. Or not a closing argument, a closing statement.
Right.
And when it came time for him to give his closing statement, he did some preaching, some proselytizing. I don't think there's any other way to describe it. And some of the people that were there got upset and hung up.
Yeah.
So I was curious to know what your take was on that.
Well, the people who hung up or protested and interrupted him and then eventually left, I understand how they felt, because it's not so much the content of what Matthew was saying. It's just the fact that we have all heard that so many times before, and it's just like white noise. When an evangelical Christian goes into witnessing mode or sermon mode and just starts rattling off all these boilerplate evangelical Christian points, even someone like me, who, I just said I never get tired of this conversation, but that's something where it's that you have to be patient. You have to sit there and go, okay, here he goes. He's doing the Ray Comfort thing, and you just have, and I sat there and didn't say anything, because I felt like he had invited me. I was his guest. And we had agreed sort of informally beforehand that everybody would have a chance to speak at the end. And if he wants to use his time at the end of his hangout to drone on and on and on and put everybody to sleep with a sermon, that's his prerogative. And I'll just sit here and, and just listen to it, because I felt I had been reasonably well treated throughout the hangout. I thought it was a good discussion. I had a good time. And, I just decided to sit there, and I didn't think it was really my place to say much. A few others didn't feel that way.
And I know, and one of the few others, and I have no problem calling them out, Bionic Dance. She's going to be a guest of mine in a couple of weeks, and I'm gonna address this with her as well, because I'd like to get her perspective on it, and I'd like to see where she's coming from. And we were all participants in that event, and I don't see anything wrong with I mean, anybody can watch it, so it's out there for anyone to see. So I would be
selling anybody out. Yeah.
No, exactly. So I mean, I was just curious to what your take was, because I saw that you kind of hung in there too, and I have to admit that I kind of struggle with the balance between I guess what I call being moderate enough to make sure that the person that I'm talking to is heard, but being activist enough to make sure that my voice is represented in the pool of voices. You know what I mean? And I couldn't determine whether that was a moment to jump in and be like, okay, a minute and a half has gone by and you're still talking about things from the Bible, whereas everybody took like 30 seconds to say something gracious. You know what I mean? So, but I ended up, like you, recognizing that I was a guest of his, and if he wanted to spend that amount of time testifying, witnessing, that didn't offend me so much that I thought that I should leave. So, and I'm going to get Bionic's side of things in a couple of weeks, and I'll be curious to see, how they compare contrast to the conversation we're having right now. So is there anything else about that? Did you get any backlash? Did you get any response from any of your theist or atheist friends on your channel about that conversation?
No, nothing that I can recall. I know there are, when I get backlash from interacting with other YouTubers, it's usually from people who think I was too nice to people they didn't like. There are, and it's true. There are. You mentioned you're gonna have Bionic Dance on in a few weeks. There are people, fellow atheists, who just can't stand her, and I'm not really one of those. I think she's fine. I don't have any problem with her at all. I mean, I'm sure that if she and I had like a lengthy one-on-one conversation about things, we would find stuff we disagreed on, and But I don't. I mean, I don't get the vitriol against her from some people, but I got the same thing when I was on Bible Thumping Wingnut's show with Cy, and I had a debate last year with Shock of God on his chat server, and I got the same thing then too. Like people were like, "You were just too nice," And I don't. Well, there aren't enough. Yeah, there are enough.
I was just gonna say I have a completely different perspective of your debate with Cy 10. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, it's fine.
I was just going to say, because you're instead of being too nice, I thought that you were concise, and instead of like kowtowing to him, you're just like questioning him about the things that you were curious about, and then you got out instead of engaging in the rope-a-dope, which I think that too many atheists fall victim to. So that's my perspective. So I think that you did an honorable job, and that's what drew me towards you. So to hell with those other people that think you were too nice. Yay, nice. Well, go team nice.
I'm not planning on changing my my tactic or my attitude anytime soon. I mean, like I said already, I mean, it's the conversation that interests me, and as long as we can have an interesting conversation. And I found that when you treat someone as a friend, you have much better conversations. And even though Cy 10 might be an infuriating person to talk to when he gets into robo apologist mode, and he's not interested in having a conversation like what you saw when I was talking to him on Bible Thumping Wingnut show. It wasn't so much a conversation, it was Cy constantly trying to push me into whatever spot he wanted me to be in so he could make his next argument. And that's just how he is, and that's incredibly frustrating to be on the other end of. But there's nothing to be gained by being hateful, by losing your cool with him. If you treat him as a friend, and you're kind and you're polite and you're patient and you're more respectful of him than he is being of you, I feel like you get further that way than you do by just planting your feet and going, well, if this guy is going to be an asshole to me, I'm going to be one right back to him. That doesn't usually work.
Yeah, I like that, and maybe that's one of the reasons why when I heard you talk, and I saw your videos, and I saw you in debates, or I saw you in exchanges, something about what you were saying resonated with me. It's like you were standing your ground, but you weren't engaging in the way that I see others fall guilty of, which takes the conversation off trajectory and into yelling land. So,
yeah.
So I wanted to also talk to you about one of the. So for those of you that are not familiar with Steve, I highly encourage you to go to YouTube and check out his channel, Steve Likes to Curse, all one word. And he has a variety of things that he posts throughout the week. And one of them is, 5 stupid things about, and, that changes from week to week. And what is the one you had to ask?
Yeah, on Fridays, yeah.
On Fridays. And then another series that he has is he reads a bunch of apologetic books, and the series is called An Atheist Reads. Evidence That Demands a Verdict happens to be the new one. So I wanted to kind of address that specific series, the one where An Atheist Reads series. What inspired that?
I actually ripped that off because there was a YouTuber, a girl who had a YouTube channel. I guess it's over 2 years ago now. Her username was Faith Fights Fact, and she was just getting done with high school and about to start college. And she had come from a very Christian family, but she was realizing she was an atheist, and she started this YouTube channel. And she was really smart and really interesting. And she eventually had to close her channel because her parents found out about it and kind of overreacted. But before she closed her channel, she made a couple of videos about how her parents, I think it was her father, had given her a copy of Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ. I think maybe sensing that her faith was waning, And he handed her this book, and she did a couple of videos where she would read from the book and sort of comment on it as she went. And then she closed her channel right after that. She only did maybe 2 videos like that. And I thought, that's such a good idea. And I don't do mine the way that she did, because she was literally like reading the book on camera and stopping whenever a thought occurred to her and putting in a comment, like a running commentary. And the way I do it is more like a classroom lecture, where I'll give you a summary of what the arguments are and pertinent quotations, and then I'll sort of offer my analysis after the fact. And I just thought it was a really good idea. I thought it was useful to me, because I think it's important to know what people who disagree with you think and why they think it. And it's good exercise to encounter other arguments and sort of, okay, I disagree with that, but why do I disagree with that? Why is that wrong? And to be able to articulate that. So it's of use to me personally for completely selfish reasons. And it's of use to other atheists as well, because as happened with her, these books occasionally find their way into our hands. Well-meaning relatives or friends will hand you a Josh McDowell book or a Lee Strobel book or a copy of Mere Christianity, or pick a title out of the air, and they'll say, "Oh, I think you should read this. This would be really interesting for you, or maybe this will answer some of your questions." And number one, not everybody feels like reading the book, and number two, not everybody really knows what to do with it, because not every atheist is as interested in the conversation as I am, as you are, as most of us who do this on YouTube or as on the internet are interested. We've thought about it, we've talked about it, we have our worldviews sort of at a level of confidence where we can have arguments and we can form strong opinions about these things. And not everybody is like that. And someone might be an atheist and might be handed a copy of an apologetics book and just say to themselves, well, I know that I don't agree with this, but I can't quite put my finger on why. And so An Atheist Read series are of use to those people too.
I'm glad that you said that because, I mean, you've pretty much summarized my experience. And I'd like to address that in a second. But as far as the way that you go about your analysis, before I get to that story,
Right.
the way that you handle your analysis, how is it and what resources do you use in analyzing or countering the arguments that you come across in these apologetic books? Like, did you have a major in philosophy? Do you have a cohort of friends that you call or that you can tap into or dip into that are familiar with these kinds of questions? Do you use the intertubes .net to do this?
There have been times when I have wished I had been a philosophy major because it would have probably helped me a lot. I was an English major in college, so I have very little formal training in philosophy, which I think shows from time to time in the videos. But no, it's when I have to go outside of myself to refute something that is argued. There are the books I've chosen have been relatively popular, so I have occasionally consulted like other people who have written essays about the books, and okay, what was this guy thinking? Maybe that would help me. Like the website infidels.org has some interesting breakdowns of a few of the books that I've done, and occasionally if I get stuck somewhere, I might go and kind of try to jog something loose by reading something from them. Um,
Sure.
and I mean, and one of my most valuable resources for the Josh McDowell book recently has been Strong's Concordance. Which, for people who don't know, is a compendium of every word that is used in the King James Bible, which you can look up what the actual original Hebrew or Greek or whatever word was. And then you can cross-reference all the times that word appears in the Bible, and it's a fantastic resource, and it's designed for Christians to use, but an atheist can use it just as well as a Christian. And I used it in the most recent video in that series that I put up when Josh McDowell was arguing about the virgin birth and the miraculous conception of Jesus, and he's trying to make an argument that there was an Old Testament prophecy in the book of Isaiah that foretold Mary being a virgin, and by looking up the word that is used to denote virgin, or that is translated as virgin in that particular verse with Strong's Concordance, you can find out in a couple of seconds now, thanks to the internet, that the word used that is translated as virgin is not the usual word for virgin, and that there's a much more direct word meaning virgin that is used throughout the Bible that could have been used if that was really significant. So things like that, and that feels good as an atheist. That feels good to use a biblical resource to argue against an evangelical position. There's something really cool about that. But yeah,
Well,
things like that. But
I was just going
most
to
of the
say, you seem to be dipping into like evidentiary or evidentialist kind of things. Like, that you seem to be able to sink your teeth into the kind of arguments that you would have with an apologetic that is based on the evidence, right? And the whole movement in apologetics now is not to argue evidence. It is to argue the presupposition that you can't even argue about anything, evidence or whatever, without the Christian God being true.
Right. And I'm glad that you brought that up. It's nice that you are sort of stuck in presuppositionalist mode too, because I've been in and out of it for like the last year. Because, as you say, that argument is being used all over the place on the internet. All of a sudden, it's become very, very popular. The transcendental argument that basically says God has to exist because if God didn't exist, then you couldn't know anything, but you do know stuff, therefore God exists. And it's such a pitiful argument, and it's so stupid. And I can't imagine how it could persuade anybody who didn't already agree with it. And yet it's everywhere. And I just wrote and shot a 5 Stupid Things video about presuppositionalism that won't actually go up for a few more weeks because I shoot those way ahead of time, the ones that are just about topics. But I'm very much in that headspace now, and
cool.
It's so frustrating, but yet it's compelling at the same time, because I'm one of the things that one of the things that fascinates me is why do people believe this? And it's not just in like, I mean, that can sound really condescending and snide, like, how could you believe that? But there's
Mhm.
an honest question in there too. Like, literally, I want to understand how you can believe this. Because when I look at it, it just seems instantly wrong. Like, it just,
Mhm.
I can tell you what's wrong with it without even having to think too much about it. And yet there are people
Well,
who cling to this as their argument.
yes, but I actually, not to self-promote too much, but yesterday I had a fantastic conversation with a presuppositionalist apologetic minister by the name of Dustin Seegers, and he was super duper gracious and articulate about his presuppositional argument without using the presuppositional argument, which was something I don't think I've ever seen before. So
Yeah.
I can't say that I don't understand why, because in talking to him and in doing my research for that interview, not knowing in what direction it was going to go, I tried to be as prepared as possible. There is a video where he articulates in no uncertain terms why the presuppositional argument is superior to all other apologetics, and I can go through it super duper quick if you were curious.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Um, all right, he pretty much argues this. Hold on a second, I need to pull up some notes. Maybe I can just put it in if I can do it from memory. He pretty much argues. The vast majority of other apologetics works upon this method, saying, "You show me, secular world, what criteria would be sufficient to show certainty, and I will show you how the Christian philosophy meets those criteria." And he says that that is the wrong way to do things, because you're pretty much proving that there are criteria beyond. There are things that are more certain than the Christian worldview by having benchmarks that you're looking to achieve. And he also says that the downside of those apologetics is it makes it look like secular benchmarks for certainty are autonomous and can stand alone. So then he contrasts that with the presuppositional argument, where he says, we presuppose God to know anything, period. So in order to even have an argument about evidence, to even have a discussion about secular benchmarks, you need to use logic, and logic is a proposition, and propositions are immaterial things and universal and necessary, and they have to exist in a mind, and whose mind does that exist in? God.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that that makes sense just because I just said it. What I'm saying is if you're because of cognitive biases and heuristics and the environment you surround yourself with, and confirmation bias, surrounding yourself with like-minded people, this, that, and the other, you can kind of work yourself into maybe one of those apologetics and that making sense, and then seeing this bright, shiny new apologetic over here and being like, wow, well, hold on a second. That's bulletproof.
Right.
And adhering, like psychologically, that would resonate with somebody. I can see that.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I see the appeal of it from the inside, because once you get to that point, you basically allowed yourself to believe that you can't possibly be wrong. And I can see why that is appealing to people. Of course, I mean, it's also one of the big reasons why it's not appealing to me, because I just don't think that's how anything works. I don't think there's any such thing as a position that you can get to where you can safely say, okay, I can't ever possibly be wrong. There's no evidence, there's no argument that will ever contradict me on this. I think that's a really, really dangerous place to be. And I don't think it's a very honest place to be. But once you get there, however you get there, I can see why it's very comforting. Who wouldn't want, just from an ego standpoint, to be able to say, oh, I know I'm right. I can't possibly be wrong. And then they also add the added layer of, oh, and you know that I'm right because you believe it too, because God has revealed the same thing to you that he has revealed to me. I love that.
Yeah. Which is essentially what, the two quote fallacy? that they will use
Yeah.
upon you, that Side 10 Bruggencate loves to use upon people that are just like, I'm a human and so are you. That's a two-quote fallacy. Not really. Humans behave
Yeah.
a certain way and you're a human. That's all I'm saying. That's a two-quote fallacy. No, it's not.
Yeah. It's well, and the whole assumption, like it's even present in the summary you just gave of how that the pastor you interviewed described the presuppositional argument. There's all these little word games and sort of plays on ideas that they set up. Like the version I heard of it from Psy was that it's not for us to judge whether or not God is real, because then that is placing God under our judgment, and God is superior to our judgment, and he should never be
Yes.
placed, under our judgment. And that's to me, that's so insane.
It's dogmatism
Because
by definition.
because yeah, it absolutely.
Certain things are too sacred.
And you're not, because I didn't get a chance to explain this to Sai, but it's the same sort of thing as saying, well, what your guy said. Well, if you try to prove things to a secular worldview, then you're admitting that the secular worldview is somehow superior to the Christian worldview. No, you're talking to a person. You're trying to persuade them that you are right and they are wrong. Therefore, you need to satisfy the conditions that will compel their belief. That's just the way it is. It's not a statement of anything absolute. It's not admitting that there are these real objective standards that are superior to yours. You're just talking to a person who has a different belief, and you want to persuade them. There's no need to extrapolate anything beyond that. And yet they do that, and they use that as the excuse for why they refuse to offer evidence. They say, well, I know my belief is true, and I know that God is the ultimate authority, and I'm not going to lower God underneath your authority. It's not up to you to decide whether God is real or not. And occasionally they can get rather self-righteous about it. And it's just, like I say, it's such a silly thing to say to a person who doesn't already believe that it's it can be frustrating at times. But I understand the comfort
but you're suppressing it. I mean, that's what it comes down to. That's what it feels like, at least, when you're talking to people that take a really strong stance on that apologetic. But we have about 10 minutes left, or a little under 10 minutes left, I should say. And I'd like to move on to some closing questions. Now, I know on one of your shows you do something called a lightning round. I think that's the you had to ask.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I have something like the lightning round. Try to be as pithy as you can in answering some of these questions. All right.
All right.
Would the world be better off without theists?
Yes. I would say the world would be better off without theism. I'd rather put it that way.
I hear you. So the belief and not the people.
Yeah.
Okay. So the world would be better without theism. Do you mind going into a short explanation as to why?
I just think the world would be better if more people believed more true things. I mean, if there wasn't theism, if there wasn't religion, we'd find other things to argue about. But I think the world would be a better place if more people had good, solid reasons for believing what they believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what evidence would disprove your worldview?
Well, there are lots of things in principle that would disprove it. I actually mentioned this in the last You Had to Ask video. Just as a hypothetical, if Jesus were still here, if Jesus still existed and was working miracles as he supposedly did back in the New Testament times, because the argument used for miracles is that, well, the miracles were there to authenticate the faith. Okay, fair enough. Well, then where are the miracles today? There aren't any. Do we not need the faith to be authenticated? Why should we accept the authentication of 2,000 years ago? Why don't we get our own authentication if they got some authentication in person from the Son of God back then? That would be one thing. It would at least be more than what we have. When people say that the Bible is a supernatural book, if the Bible had actual supernatural properties, I said if it was impossible to mistranslate the Bible. If you opened it up and you tried to read from it, and even if you really tried, you could not read something wrong from the Bible. You could not misquote it. I mean, there are all kinds of imaginary things that you could think of that, if it were true, that couldn't immediately be accounted for by science, at least not off the top of my head, that would be at least compelling, maybe not definitive, but at least very compelling.
Okay. What question would you most want to be asked by a theist?
I mean, it's vague, but a good question for anybody to ask is, what are some reasons why I might be wrong? Just the question you just asked me. You know, I don't think theists ask themselves that question often enough. And maybe none of us do, but you know, what are some reasons why I could be wrong? What are some things that contradict what I think, and how much consideration do those things deserve? You know, but really any honest question is a good one, especially when you believe in something that has absolutely no evidence to demonstrate it.
Now, here's the flip side. What question would you least want to be asked by a theist?
Oh, the questions that theists sometimes ask atheists that just strike me as kind of silly and condescending, like, well, have you ever asked Jesus to show himself to you? You know, have you ever asked God to tell you if he's real? That sort of thing, just, you know, it's even when well-meaning people say that, it always comes off as really condescending. You know, like, have you written a letter to Santa Claus this year? I mean, how can you ask me to do something that I really, really, really think is imaginary? You know, it doesn't sound very good.
No. And let's say, okay, this is a little bit longer of a question, so please bear with me. Let's say you got to pick the smartest, wisest person that you can come up with as a representative of humanity to answer this simple question: does God exist? What field of study should that person be predominantly known for?
I think they should be a scientist. Okay. I think ultimately it comes down to physical evidence. I mean, I was an English major. I have a great appreciation for poetry. I have a great appreciation from standing from the outside of philosophy. I mean, I don't have a lot of formal schooling in philosophy. A lot of it is over my head. A lot of it is sort of above my weight class. But ultimately, it comes down to science to me. If something is real, and you're trying to answer a question of does such a thing exist, there should be evidence for it that I can see, that I can look at, that I can understand, that I can hold in my hand in principle. So I think a scientist is the best person to answer that question, because when you're saying God exists, you're making a statement about the nature of reality. Even if you're saying that God is supernatural and he doesn't obey our laws and, you know, all the things people say about God, he's this transcendent being, he still has a physical component. He's still doing things in our universe. He's still responsible for things that have happened in our universe. And if that's true, I want to see evidence of it. And I think that makes it a scientific question. And I think that a scientist is the best person to answer that question.
It's a great answer. Well, that pretty much is all of the questions that I have in closing. I very much want to thank you for spending your afternoon discussing these things with me, Steve.
It was a pleasure. I would love to do it again sometime.
Indeed. And for those of you that are watching, I want to remind you that at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, I will be doing another meeting of the minds, and my guest will be Aaron Ra. So please stay tuned. Keep watching the New Covenant Group's channel on Ustream, and I will see you in a little bit. Thank you very much.